Okay. As it's 6:30, I will start, but Ian Tilbury's still to turn up. And I've had apologies from Tony Keeple, but I'll say that again in a minute. There's Ian, that's everyone I was expecting. Okay, I'll start. I am Councillor Paul Frankham, the Chair of the Scrutiny Committee, and would like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which we're being held virtually in accordance with the Council rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the recent published government regulations. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to viewers after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on the committee identified by name on screen, and I will introduce the officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present in the council meeting, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the members' code of conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Can members ensure their mobile phones are now switched off? And Mum, can you turn yours off? Members of the committee will turn their video link off during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they'll be invited to speak by myself as chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to vote or take in any voting taken on the item under discussion. Members can indicate they wish to speak by raising their hands and should only speak when as chair I invite them to do so. The officers present will only switch their video link on during the items that they are present or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. As chair, I confirm the name of the visiting speakers at the appropriate time in the agenda and who will be addressed to the committee by audio link. Councillors should declare that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they've a disclosable pecuniary interest or other personal interest in an item on the agenda. The councillors can switch the video link when I call the next agenda item. The vote will be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation proposal to the committee before the vote begins. Can each member indicate whether for or against recommended or they wish to abstain? Hopefully there will not be any IT problems, but I can remind members that if their connection is lost, should immediately advise Director of Services and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. Right, housework over. Okay, apologies and substitution. I've got a substitution. Councillor Harvey is replacing Councillor David Potter, and Councillor Tony Copon has sent his apologies, and everybody else looks like they're here. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, Councillor David George.
Very quickly, I noticed in the KPIs that the silt mill is mentioned on a number of occasions and things like that. So now I'm a trustee of the Whitchurch silt mill. So it's just really just advising of that. I don't think there's any pecuniary conflict of interest, but I just like people to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Any other declaration of interest? Okay, I'll move on to the next item. Urgent items. We've had a call in. We've got the 5th member today. So we need to set a date for a call-in by the 15th of April, and it's to do with our 5-year land supply. So I don't know, Sadie, if you want to suggest some dates and to see if the committee.
Yes, of course. Just one moment. Would the 6th of April, which is a Tuesday as well? I mean, does it have to be a Tuesday? Would Tuesday suit people?
Tuesday's the least best day for me, but I'm happy to go the majority.
There's a 6th of April, or there is the 13th of April. I think both of those, unfortunately, are in the Easter holidays, but I think given the fact that it's urgent and obviously it's a call-in, then that would need to pass.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, question. Can we accept a call-in in Purda?
It's been agreed with the legal officer, yes, and it's not actually Purder at the moment.
Sue Curtin.
Okay, and not at the moment, but at the time of you're proposing.
We'd be fine for that. That's the final date is the 15th. That's why we give that is the latest date that we can hold it.
Thank you.
Sue Curtin, what is?
Yeah, so due to the call-in rules, we have to convene the meeting and have the discussion, and Fiona as the monitoring officer has taken that decision, and as Sadie said, that's the latest that we can actually hold the meeting, also under the scrutiny call-in part of the Constitution. What I would ask members to recognise is that officers may well need time to respond to the call-in, and officers are using up their annual leave at the moment, especially linked to and around the Easter holidays. So if you would give consideration to the 13th, I think officers might be extremely grateful.
Councillor Harvey, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say it would help officers, I think, to have the 13th of April as the date to do it on. And if that's what the committee decide, then I would support that.
Okay, Councillor Kim Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I seem to have something called the Town Centre Strategy in the diary for the 13th. So that's not looking very likely for me.
And me neither. But no, already booked up.
So Sadie, is another date that's not a Tuesday near the 13th we can do?
Yeah, of course. Well, there's the 14th or the 12th, which is the Monday or Wednesday. There's nothing showing up on the Dem Services calendar on either of those days.
Would the 14th be all right with everyone on the committee?
I can make the 14th, certainly.
So Wednesday the 14th.
Wednesday the 14th. Time at 6:30. Okay.
I'll put that in the calendar and send out invites tomorrow.
Okay, that'd be great, and we'll get paperwork nearer the time, so it gives them time to write the report. Excellent. Okay. There's no other.
Can we have sight of the reason for the call-in? At least that'll give us something to work on.
I'll circulate that tomorrow, Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Sadie.
Okay. Anything else on that before I move? Okay, there's no other action items. So next is the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of November. Are they really happy with the accuracy? Councillor David George, you're shaking your head. Okay, I'll accept them as okay then. Next is the development contributions, their collection and spending, and Councillor Paul Miller was chairing the panel for this. So I'll hand over to you for the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman and members. You will have seen the report in agenda item number 5. This is a result of the Task and Finish group, where all members, or the majority of members, had real concerns about not understanding the proper process of the S106 system. We all had different wards affected by different developments, but trying to track down developers' contributions to improve our communities in various regards was a bit of a black art to all of us. So on scrutiny here, we established a Task and Finish group to actually sort out what the process was, allow officers who themselves admitted at the time that there was a bit of disconnect between the various departments within the council, and get an overall view of exactly how the system worked. And we started off with a flow chart, which was circulated to members of this committee and the Task and Finish group at least 3 times. Comments were made, fed back, and what we wanted to do in the process of that flow chart, and I think we've ended up with a reasonably easy one to read, was where members actually connected with the process, engaged with officers from the very beginning in the process, which is undertaken essentially through the planning and development arena, and so that the input and understanding of members in their particular wards is much broader than it has been in the past. Now, when we got that, essentially, we were content with what that flowchart was going. That was the first part of all this. I've been spending my time with officers. I've been kept up to date with the kind of officers' negotiation within the borough, from planning through to legal, because the S106 is legal agreement. Then we had to integrate the SIL process as well, which again is a little bit of a black art, and it hasn't really got off the ground in Basingstoke and Dean, but now it's established itself, and we're now starting to see a bit more of a flow of funding. So the two sort of go together because they're developers' contributions towards those monies for all kinds of things, from the community facilities we have in our wards, the community halls, to the infrastructure, to possibly the non-educational part of schools on the community side, and to certain bits of infrastructure that we need to support our communities. Now, that has taken quite a long time because finance comes into this as well, which is one reason that Sue Curden is here. And you will find this process written into the report. And I commend section 2 to you, because as you work through section 2, in an association with the flow chart, you will see where, and I've been through this, where the members integrate to it. And then it goes on through section 2, right through section 212 to 219, at 223, which is where there's a summary there of what we intend to do with this particular report. This report, the intention is, subject to the acceptance by the Scrutiny Committee, will sit as a document within the induction of new councillors and in the training, and accessible to all wards, all councillors. They're all changing, we're going to have a new council in May, for people, ward councillors, to understand where they fit into the system. Now, I've been a ward councillor quite a long time now. It scares me when I look back, but I still didn't really have a handle on how the S106 worked. I was lucky, I was in a parish, an urban parish here in Chinham, but those parts of the borough that aren't parished, certainly the wards within the town, it's slightly more difficult, which is why this was essential to make sure that everybody understood how the process worked, no matter where you were, in the rural part of the borough or in the urban parts of the borough. Well, quite frankly, I leave the report to you. It was distributed, I was notified on the 12th of March. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through it. We've got both Ruth and Muller here, who is on the officer side, on the planning side, assisted me greatly in producing that side of it. It's been through Sue Curden on the financial side, and together with the written report, we've got the flow chart in the documents tonight, and also the most up-to-date February 2020. It's the Local Government Association Developer Contributions brochure, which gives you a picture there. That hopefully is a complete package that we can take forward. It can be adapted as regulations change, but as it sits at the moment, that is the current state of play. And I hope that we've achieved something since, what, the third quarter of 2019 to date. And in the new council year, we've got a properly structured document to go forward so we can educate everybody. Questions? Ruth O'Malley's here from the planning side, and Sue's here on the financial side. And I don't know how you want to work this, Chair, if you want to take the questions and feed it to the appropriate officers.
I will do. Andy, do you want to ask a question now, or do you want to let Ruth have a go first?
I'll let Ruth present first. I do have a question.
Okay. Ruth, if you want to present, and then I'll ask Andy his question.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee. It was a pleasure to help Councillor Miller come to the point of pulling together all of the information before you tonight, just covering all of the Section 106 and SIL information and ensuring that you've got all of what we do what has been done and what processes have been improved over the time of the working group. I hope that it's all quite clear and that you're able to direct your questions as you wish to me. Otherwise, I have nothing further to report. It's all in the report and on your agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. Councillor McCormack, what's your question?
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually on the funding statement that appears on page 23, section 3, little e. The total amount of money received under any planning obligations which was allocated but not spent during the reported year for funding infrastructure, £6.7 million. My question is, what's going to happen to that money? And aligned to that is, if it can't be spent in areas that are immediately, within the ward of a development, what scope is there for relaxing the criteria so that it can be spent elsewhere? My fear is that that money will be reclaimed and not used.
Okay, Sue Gurdon, do you want to answer that, please?
Yeah, I'll answer it in part, but Ruth might want to come in on the second part of the question. So, as per the capital programme update approved by Council in February, there's now only £2.7 million over the period of the MTFS that hasn't actually been allocated to a scheme at the current time. And officers are obviously will be continuing to work proactively to find an appropriate scheme, discussed with ward members, etc., per the information that Councillor Miller has pulled together and circulated. My understanding, and Ruth can obviously give further detail on this, is that if we genuinely don't think that we can find a suitable scheme to use the Section 106 monies in line with the original planning requirements, we can actually contact the developer if we're still able to get hold of them and seek to vary the Section 106 agreement. My experience is I've never had a developer come back and seek to recover their monies, but that's not to say they wouldn't, and therefore there is a small risk to the authority that if we don't spend the money in the appropriate timescale, that we would risk having to repay that. But obviously we're recognising and currently actively looking at and trying to bring forward a whole raft of schemes to make sure that we don't have that legacy. So that's why part 2 of the flow chart starts with that word legacy, because we've got, effectively there's 2 processes that we have to follow, but we are actively trying to look at the legacy Section 106 agreements that we have.
Ruth, would you like to add anything to that?
Sue's fantastic. She understands the entire process really clearly and has set out everything there. I think the thing that members need to remember is that we collected Section 106 contributions for a purpose, a planning purpose. And that planning purpose still remains in relation to the development, which is why Sue was explaining that actually it's collected for that purpose and we need to direct it towards that spend. So it's not as though it has no relevance, otherwise we would never have entered into the 106 agreement or required it. And going through the process of actually reviewing those last 106 agreements in relation to that historical spend is what we're to first do, and then, like Sue mentioned, alternatively contact the developers if for whatever reason that capital project's not coming forward.
Okay, thank you. As Andy's put his hand down, I take it you're satisfied with the answer. Got no supplementary.
In part, the only thing I would say is that if we're not getting Section 106 money spent, that suggests there's a problem in terms of identified need. And the Section 106 money is not being put to good use. If it transpires that there are other areas that need that money and somehow we can't spend it because it's not directly pertaining to the development, what scope is there within council finance rules to match fund or fund from council resources facilities that are needed in adjoining communities that are not directly impacted by the development? Because what I can see is that communities that have development get more money and certain types of infrastructure only provided through development contributions. and those that don't have developer contributions go without. So I would like to see a level playing field.
Well, from obviously the ward I represent properly, we've had huge amounts of 106 over the recent years, and the officers are very good at finding ways to spend the money. It might not directly be on our ward, but they've made good use of the money. Sue wishes to comment.
Yeah, so I think obviously in respect to the section 106, I think obviously we've picked that up. It's we can't just use it in other parts of the authority in the borough. Obviously, one of the big pieces of work going on at the moment is looking at the community strategy and how we direct our funds, and linked to that, looking at each individual ward and doing that ward analysis in terms of what's the need in that ward will also lead to an identification of trying to understand what are the facilities and other requirements of each of the wards. And as part of that, it may well be that schemes come forward for consideration for council funding outside of the Section 106 agreements. So we can't link this particular funding to needs elsewhere necessarily in the borough, but there are separate activities going on, which is trying to address some of the issues that you've raised, Councillor McCormick.
Okay, Councillor Murray, have you got something to comment on this?
Yes, thank you very much. On this particular topic, I thank Councillor McCormick because you just highlighted the reason for this report, because it was because the ward members were not engaged right at the very beginning, and I'm going back probably 15, 18 years, that disconnect was what we have now tried to plug. The legacy problem, I think we all recognize was going to be a problem for the very points that Sue Curden's brought up. I'm with you 100% that, you know, it would be nice if, but unfortunately, S106, as you well know, is very strictly controlled under the legal frameworks. If there was a mechanism, and I agree with the chairman, you know, honestly, we would be doing what we can do, and that the officers have bent over backwards to really try and work within the constraints that they've got. But thank you for raising it, because quite frankly, that's what we produced tonight. We wanted something where we could move on, get member involvement, because who knows the communities best? From our perspective, it's us. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I'm going to move on because I've got three more speakers in Councillor George, Taylor and Faulkner. So if I start with Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Look, firstly, let me say it's been very, very helpful. The flow chart is great, and I think that's going to be extremely useful in terms of, shall we say, members knowing exactly where they can get involved and what they can do. So well done on that. I think it's an excellent piece of work and takes forward. I'd like to make sort of, I suppose it's an observation, but I think I'm very pleased that Ruth is here tonight, but this is looking forward, because the way we have it at the moment and reading through all this has been very, very helpful. But if we look at SIL in particular, now I notice fundamentally in the local plan as it is, you know, SIL has been very much 0 rated on Many Down and reduced rating on other major developments in Basingstoke-on-Deane. But on the rural community, there's, you know, it is a rural community tax the way it currently comes out of the local plan at the moment. It's fundamentally you know, and particularly as we're looking to take, you know, put more housing in rural areas and rural centres, you know, that's where the money is going to be collected, because Many Down, basically all the money is very much, you know, going through Section 106 for their needs, and some of the others, again, the rate of SIL is much lower than in the rural areas. However, if you look at the infrastructure list where it's going to be used on, it is truly, there's very little out there for the rural areas at all. You know, there's bits and bobs there. There's some infrastructure works on roads on 300, 400, but there's very little. So at the moment, the way we've got it working is, it may be totally unintentional, but we have got this fundamentally as a tax on rural housing development, which is going to be used primarily, unfortunately, the way it looks at the moment, for infrastructure developments within Basingstoke-on-Deane town area. You know, and I really think we need to look at that for when we're looking at the local plan review going forward, and try and rectify that, because it's at the moment it feels very uncomfortable.
I'm looking to see who wants to. Ruth, have you got any comments out, or Sue?
Yeah, I'm happy to just answer the question at a high level. In terms of the local plan going forward, yes, you're right, Councillor George, that what we do is that when the members have got to the position where they've agreed where the development is to occur, the actual spatial strategy will link the infrastructure delivery plan, the IDP, to where that development would be occurring, and it may well identify infrastructure needs of those communities where that development will be occurring. And if that's actually in the rural communities, then that would be identified as a need. The idea that as you're quite right, SIL is a development tax, and so therefore it is appropriate that development is taxed to bring forward the infrastructure that's needed. So I think that the point that you're making, though, is making sure that the IDP identifies a spread of infrastructure that addresses all communities across the borough, and I take that point.
Okay, thank you. Have you got any further supplementaries on that, Councillor George?
Well, the only thing, thank you, and I do recognise clearly with the SIL that if there's a neighbourhood plan in place, I believe it's 25% goes to the local community anyway, which will help. But certainly, if there isn't a neighbourhood plan in place, I think is it 15%, Ruth? I think it is. So you know, a much smaller proportion. But I think at the moment there's an imbalance here in terms of certainly, you know, for developments that will occur over the next few years, because what's in the local plan and many down and things like that, there is this inbuilt, should we say, siphoning off of monies from the rural areas into Basingstoke and Dean. I think that just I'm glad for that recognition. Thank you.
I think your questions that were answered as you speak. I could see nodding heads, and the rest was a statement. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Kim Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody for producing this report. I mean, I have to say this whole question of SIL and Section 106 very much felt like a dark art as far as I was concerned, because I'm not heavily involved in the planning aspects of things. It's probably a little, you know, more shades of grey now, and I dare say that I mean the flow chart is very useful, and I dare say that the having documentation backed up by an induction session, I think, you know, is very helpful, particularly for very brand new councillors, because, you know, often lots of the words and the terms are sort of, you tend to get sort of a bit like a sponge after a while. So I think having a discussion as well as documentation is really, really helpful. I think that what would also be really helpful is that after, you know, the election is finished, is that all councillors that have been elected should receive a statement of what Section 106 funding is knocking about and SIL funding is knocking about in their wards specifically, so that they understand what is there and they can have a conversation about that. I think that would be really useful, because I've yet to get a handle on that. It could be my fault. I'm willing to accept that.
That's someone like me that is important with all our development. That's going to be a long list. So I remember looking at them. But yes, if Sue Kern would like to answer that.
Yeah, so I've previously had a conversation with Councillor Taylor, who quite very kindly raised that issue at the point, and we have obviously as part of the member induction pack, which will have more information about individual wards for the members. It's certainly something that we can look at as part of that pack. But obviously what we want to do is make sure we can put some coverage around it, and as you say, as part of the induction training, make sure members understand what that actually means in terms of what it can and can't be used for.
I remember long discussions in the north of Hopley development around that. Has that answered your question, Kim, or you've got any?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part, you know, because you know, it's very hard to get the information. You don't always know which officers to go to for information, and so if you have the information before you from the start, you can ask the questions. You know, what does this get used for? How do we use it? How can I put some input or some ideas into this? If you don't know that there's anything there, you can't sort of start that dialogue off. So I think having a statement, I appreciate for Poplar it might be quite large, and perhaps for Brighton Hill it'd be quite small, but nonetheless I think if members don't know what it is, they can't start getting engaged with the dialogue, particularly on the legacy stuff. I think it'd be really useful to have as a pack item.
Okay, I think Sue's taken that point on. So I've got Councillor Faulkner was the next to indicate. Or is that Sue?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's following on from the theme from Councillor George as regards the rural parishes. This document and the flowchart is extremely useful, and thanks to the team for producing that. I think maybe we should think about using some of it that we could use as a document to issue to the parish councils, because they're in even a bigger dark hole than we are. Because when you think of the turnover of councillors and clerks, it's more than we are as councillors, for instance. So it's an even bigger black ark for them. And there's a number of key things that I've had to deal with over the 7 years. One is in one case, it took about 3 years to get a list of what was available, by which time some of those, what had been defined by officers as a project, was no longer required, but they couldn't spend money on anything else, which led to extreme frustration. And then we had situations where S106 in one parish was allocated to another parish 10 miles away, and that created a little bit of a furrow. And the other one is, for instance, fairly recently, where S106 for affordable housing in one of the parishes, or two of the parishes, was allocated to Basingstoke Town Centre to convert flats to affordable flats. And I got quite a pasting, as you can imagine, from those parish councils. So I think this is a fabulous sort of advance for us councillors. I think we should then think, how can we help the parish councils in the same way? Thanks.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago that we had the 106 money for a play area. They built it in Tadley. So then they had to get the money to build the proper one in Popley. Ruth, would you like to comment on that, or would Sue be best to? So I'll let Sue answer it because she just come up.
I am happy for Ruth to pick that up. Obviously, we do regularly engage with the town and parish councils, regularly attend their overarching meetings. I'm sure there will be an opportunity for us to take the information to them and go through it with them at some point. But obviously there are mechanisms in place to make sure that we do actually already engage. But if there is something about resetting the message and how it works, I'm happy to support that. But Ruth may have more information in terms of how they currently engage.
Thank you. Ruth, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think that actually post the election, like you've raised, it's not just an issue for local councillors who are elected and their training, but it's actually really something that we need to roll out to parish and town councils as well, because of the point that you've raised. And they do receive potentially quite substantial amounts of money from SIL, 25% for their areas where they've had development and a neighbourhood plan. So you can appreciate it's probably quite important that we include the training in relation to this aspect. We do have fairly regular engagement with parish councils because of the neighbourhood planning functions. So I think that this is something that we could definitely roll out along with other training programs to try and do a refresher on everything, because the point you said, there's a natural turnover and churn in parish councils, and so some of that sort of, I'll say, corporate knowledge that they have gets lost as members of the community wish to do other things. So no, I take that point.
Okay, Councillor Miller, as it's your report, I think you'd like to make a comment on this section.
Yep, certainly. If it helps. For the last 3 years, well, every year, I've got my DC chairman's hat on at the moment. All councillors who serve on DC and those of you on this committee who are on DC are aware of it, there's mandatory training. Once we get into the new council year, you cannot sit on DC until you've completed that training. Now, about 3 years ago, we initiated training specifically for parish councils, and it was either 2 or 3 sessions as soon as we were able to, after the start of the new council year, invited the both parish councillors and the planning clerks into the borough, and we conducted an in-depth training, and S106 came up every time. I think now we have this particular document. It's something to go and hopefully, Councillor Faulkner, this is the idea that you're getting, that we can actually participate this and program it in to those particular sessions. We got incredible feedback from the parish councils because I made it a point of attending all of those training sessions, being a parish councillor myself, and able to interact with the parish council, so we didn't leave them behind, not only on the actual planning policies, but also on this S106. So I think we've got an established routine now, which we can fold this particular topic into whatever detail the parish councils want to see it. Thank you.
Is that answer to a question, Councillor Faulkner?
Yes, I think that's been very helpful all round.
Thank you. Next, I've got Chloe Ashfield. She just disappeared. She did indicate. I'll go on to Ian and come back to her then. Oh no, she's come back. Chloe, you did indicate you wanted to speak.
Yes, I did. I was just felt that I was repeating myself. It was around inductions and parish councillor training as well. It was really just to say that, you know, I like the work that's been done, and I just am sorry that it's 5 years later, because it has always been a dark art, but I think there is a tendency for some councillors, and I've very much taken the personal experience here, that come into the council from a corporate environment or from a family environment, and things like S106 and SIL are absolute, you know, it's another language. And so I think we really need to sort of demystify it and making it the environment to ask questions, silly questions. And that, I think that I was held back by that for a good 2 or 3 years. And actually, I think that's ultimately undemocratic, because you potentially have got councillors that are afraid to ask what they see as silly questions because we've made it just too difficult. So this is a brilliant start, but I just hope with potentially quite a different council in May, I think it's a great opportunity to give everyone the comfort just to, you know, to learn it from scratch. Really sort of S106 and SIL for Dummies.
Okay, Ruth, I'll let you answer that, but that's all positive, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I would suggest that we need to make all our training more accessible for everyone, and that's around not being jargon focused and helping to explain processes and finding better ways of communicating, whether it's combinations of, you know, flow diagrams, frequently asked questions, and a lot more supportive material for members. I totally respect the fact that we all have different backgrounds. No one's taken the, you know, necessarily the path that to study town planning that's a councillor, and I think that's a fair enough reason maybe for that. So I think that's the reason why we're employed, and I've got lots of those sorts of materials that I'd, you know, really welcome having included in, you know, member packs, because I totally agree with the member that we all too often hide behind language, don't we?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on because I think everyone's answered there. Councillor Tilbury, who's next on my list?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think things have certainly improved. When I first became a councillor, most of the Section 106 money was sort of spread around in such a way it wasn't even a central register of it. It was quite bizarre. We found money all over the place. It was like stored away in jam jars, effectively, all over the council in different files. Because it was, you know, on a legal agreement, there was no connection with that in finance even. So things have improved a lot. I mean, I think one area where I see, you know, where we've had problems that I'm aware of is where there was a classic example in Overton where we had two large development sites, or sorry, a large development site of originally for 60 houses, and then the developer came forward and said, well, we'll put more affordable housing on there if you allow us to build 99. So it went to DC, and both went there on the same night, and they put the 60 in as a fallback, and both were given planning permission. And about 3 years down the line, I was talking to officers about things. They said, well, we've got all this money, but we're expecting some to come through. And of course, when I looked at it, what they had was the 99 application. They got the Section 106 money for that, because that's what had been built. But the 60 obviously couldn't be built on the same site, but the money was still shown on the register. So they was still being, there's this potential money. We're expecting it to come through when they build the site out. And of course, I had to explain to them that actually that was never going to happen. And I've had a similar thing more recently where houses have been put forward and we're expecting the money to come through, but for whatever reason that was changed, a different application went in, but the other one isn't sort of taken away. And there seems to be, again, there's still a bit of a disconnect there sometimes. And of course, often we've got planning applications on file which we know are never going to be built. I can think of at least one in my ward now which isn't likely to happen. And the other classic one, of course, was Bombay Sapphire. That was going to be a development site for 85 houses and flats, which thankfully was never built. And we got the Bombay Sapphire distillery, but the planning application for the other one never went away. So again, that was on file. So, in theory, when I looked at our Section 106 funding, we had pots of money in Overton, but of course, most of it was never going to appear. And of course, there seems to be a disconnect because no one tells the finance department that this planning application isn't going to happen. And I think there needs to be a mechanism built in there, because I can't imagine it's only happened in Overton. That was just, I believe, 3 examples where we've had these sort of bizarre things go on. So that's sort of, one problem area. And I think, and I think the points made about SIL being a rural tax are quite appropriate, but it is one way of possibly getting some money to the more deprived areas. But the reality is what we're seeing in Overton, we've had one of the first SIL estates built. And what did the developers do? Well, to recover the cost of paying the SIL, they just build outrageously expensive upmarket housing, which doesn't help anyone. It's sort of, you're seeing 2-bedroom houses in Overton selling for £350,000, where that's not at all affordable. But that's the reality of, we call these things developers' contributions. They're not. It's the people who buy the houses that pay the contribution. The developer just passes it on to us. And we need to wake up to that, because what we're doing is creating this unaffordable housing. How we get around that, I don't know. We still need the infrastructure, but, really infrastructure spending really should come from central government. It shouldn't be funded locally the way we're trying to do it, because all it does is create, a false market in housing for very rich people, basically. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, Sue, it looks like you'd like to comment on that.
I will, but I think Ruth might want to come in as well. Just to say that actually we do have a central list now, obviously, of all the Section 106 agreements. We don't allocate them until we've actually invoiced and received them. And therefore, obviously, I will certainly follow up the issue that you've raised, Councillor Tilby, but I'd be very surprised now if we're trying to spend money that we haven't received because the planning application hasn't gone forward. But I'll let Ruth comment on that if she wishes to, but I will follow it up for you.
Okay, Ruth, you want to comment as well?
So the process of monitoring Section 106, Councillor Tilbury leads to the central register that planning and finance populate does actually identify agreements that have been entered into, but not that we're not necessarily, like the point you're making, the development hasn't necessarily commenced and may never commenced or may never be implemented. And so I think that the point is that there's a process around our monitoring of data where when planning permissions have lapsed or ceased, we are able to do some data cleansing processes, but effectively there's a good reason why we would enter something in on the idea that it is like it's been entered into, so it may well come forward, and it helps to align all of that information if those payments are made. You've made all given us lovely insights into the relation, into how things have been in the past, but I think that generally answers the questions you've raised or the points you've made.
Are you happy with that answer, Ian? Have you got any supplementary? Okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Carruthers next because she hasn't spoken yet. Then I've got Taylor and George that indicate they want to speak again after that. So Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I just wanted to support what Councillor Ashfield said earlier. I actually joined the council as a by-election, so it wasn't like there were other new councillors at the time. So I felt even more perhaps silly asking questions because most of the councillors there had been councillors for quite some time. And as Councillor Ashfield said, S106 and SIL meant nothing to me. And as time's gone on, in fact, I learned things reading this report that I still didn't know 4 years on. And part of the reason for that is that I live in Tadley, and in Tadley, we have very limited development. So we don't get an awful lot of money coming through in this way because we can't build because of AWE. In fact, this week, I did get a consultation through regarding this and asking my view on it. I honestly can't remember the last time that happened. And I actually wasn't quite sure how to respond because of that. So I think it's really important that we are doing this. I think the information in here is really good. And as I said, I learned stuff reading it today. So the other thing I'll say is that Councillor Taylor mentioned earlier, sometimes it is really difficult to know what officer we need to speak to. And sometimes it's not easy to get hold of those officers. And it's another question that we don't always want to ask people. So I think that it also needs to be made really clear on this information that here's the information, but if you want to know more, these are the people you need to talk to. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to make comment there, Ruth.
Absolutely, I think it's a sensible suggestion. I would like to just generally say, and I know this might sound random, but you always need to know that you can contact your head of planning if you don't know who to contact. And I would obviously seek the support of officers below me if it's something that I feel that they can help you with. But my role is definitely to answer those questions, and you can have my confidence and no questions silly. But I take the point that frequently asked questions and actually having some key contacts and information to help you on your way is really important. I think that you need that to be able to manage all the casework inquiries and the like that you'll have. So, or that new members are bombarded with and not necessarily yet equipped to handle.
You have that, Councillor Carruthers. Got any supplementary?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, Kim Taylor, I've got you down next to speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up a little more on some of the things that other colleagues have mentioned, really. I'm sure Sue will know that it's a popular thing of mine, which is just plain English. And often we don't use plain English, and that actually makes documents really inaccessible. So, for example, in the report, the year report on the community infrastructure levy, if we look at sort of page 24, 3G, it says, in relation to money received under planning obligations, which was allocated by the authority but not spent during the reported year, summary details of the item of the infrastructure on which the money has been allocated and the amount of allocated to each item. What on earth does that mean? For example, I mean, does that actually mean this is the money we've received but we haven't spent, broken down by type? I mean, I have absolutely no idea what that means.
If you'd like to answer
So, sorry, did you say G?
Yeah, it's 3G she's referring to.
3G.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the way the wording is, this is obviously a copy of the infrastructure statement that we've had to complete and return. So it's not our wording per se, this is what we've published. So this was for information in terms of what we've published, as opposed to a document specifically for members. It was just to kind of give you some information. My understanding is this is what we've received and allocated against each of these different categories, but perhaps Ruth, you can clarify that.
So I think that the point that the councillor's making is fair in the sense that the words that you're referring to and the lack of plain English nature with them is because they're actually a direct quote from the regulation, from the actual regulations and the reference. And so the wording is from the regulations. And I think that what is interesting about that question for me is seeing whether we're actually allowed to, in our IFS, do a plain English version of it. I think that we can have a look at that, Sue, for the one that we have to do at the end of this year. And I will actually have a look around and see if other authorities have chosen a way, have, like, if I say, I don't want us to legally fall foul by actually, you know, clearly making any error. But the point that you're making is right, is that by actually using the exact text that's in the regulations, it makes it almost impenetrable, because it's really not plain English. And Sue's description of it's right. It's actually, for those categories, it's this amount of money that we've collected. And that's the simple, that's all it probably needs to say. But we've put the regulation text in there, which I appreciate. It is absurd. But I'm happy to take that as an action, because I think it needs to be a bit more plain English.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that all the terms in there would be direct lifts, but unfortunately the point still has to be made that, you know, just occasionally I like to read things and think, can I understand it, you know? And I'm not entirely silly, but it does make it difficult sometimes. And I think lots of documents become inaccessible because of the language that's used. It's just a hobby horse of mine, as being somebody who has a couple of Crystal Awards from the Plain English Society, that I'm always batting on about it. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'll move on. Councillor McKay, as you haven't spoken, I'll take you next, and Councillor George afterwards.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Councillor Taylor really about the plain English comment, and just relay from my experience of health and safety regulations that the HSE produced something called an ACOP, an approved code of practice, that sits underneath the regulations. And in effect, if you read the code of practice, you get the regulation written first, and then you get the plain English version underneath. And that's maybe a model that could be adopted for some documents like these. Thank you.
Okay, I think Ruth's taken that on board. That's very helpful. Councillor George.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I've listened, and there's some, you know, I think Councillor Ashfield brought this up about training and what have you, and the need for that. But I'd like to make one other plea, if I can as well. It may be implicit in all this, but I'm sure, you know, as a suggestion here, I think the longer term process here of how communities get themselves onto the SIL program, how they understand how to basically identify projects, take them forward and get funding for them. The whole process is a long-term issue. It takes several years. And what I'm saying is, rather, I can see here, you know, the flowchart we've got starts as a planning application, but there's a much broader program there about identifying projects, getting them on with church. We actually included it in with the neighbourhood plan, for example. We went out to the community, said, what do you think ought to be built, and all the rest. But some training on, or support to councils on that would also, I think, be extremely useful, because I think, given the turnover and what have you, I see a lot of councils floundering of how to get these major things they want doing actually coming to reality and getting forward. I can see some of them clearly come through the strategic process of Basingstoke-on-Deane, but some of the strategies don't extend to the rural communities. Once again, you know, look at the transport strategy, it doesn't extend out there. So how you do that and how you move that forward, I think, will be extremely useful as well, please.
Would you like to comment to that?
No, that's just all really, you know, sensible suggestions, and I totally take that on board. It's interesting, actually. I was just having a look to see if on page 3 of the figure 1 of the actual guidance around that connection between strategic planning, infrastructure delivery, and actual all the way around to the infrastructure delivery, it doesn't have a lot there to do with the parish and town councils. And I think that that's probably the point, isn't it, that they're actually wanting to find a way in which they can shape what's happening in their communities, which is why neighbourhood planning actually really performs an excellent role in that sense. But there's nothing more for me to add. That's all just a sensible comment from Councillor George.
Thank you. So everybody's indicated has spoken now. Is there anybody else? Oh, Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I don't know where you're going to go with this, Chair, but just a couple of questions on that last one. Something I learned when I became a borough councillor, and I became parish councillor first, which is what that's how I knew about S106, because we all already had a huge amount of money coming from the developments in Shinham. But I think ward councillors have got a responsibility, because if you have parishes or communities, we are the link between our communities and the borough council. Now, if we know something through our training, through getting documents like this and having an understanding at our level, it's a very, well, hopefully we could translate it down and pass on the information to our town and parish councils. But there's a link here, because I find that the parish councils is an inexorable link to the lower level of what the community needs. You get the report in every parish council meeting from the community manager who runs the village hall or whatever. And the sports pitches, you know, they're going to disappear. We want another sports pitch. There's where your need comes in. And I think, you know, we all work as a team. And it sort of starts down at the parish council community level, you know, the village hall, community groups, the scouts, and it eventually works its way through. And we're the link, I think, into the borough council and these strategic particular developments that go on. And they are reviewed every year. So we do have the opportunity. Now, there's one little link that hasn't been mentioned. I'm now talking on the officers' side. And yes, this can be included, but we have an officer. Her name is Kiran Hunjan, and she works in the community. She's the community's manager. And I don't know where she's going to sit now, but she is the link between planning, finance, and us. And she's the one that can tell you what monies are in what parishes and communities. And she is so helpful. You find these little gems out. You know, I found it out by doing some due diligence work myself. But Kieran, she works with me on another totally different topic, but she is the one that is, if you like, the link between all three. Now, that particular post happens to be occupied by her at the moment, but she is an absolute goldmine of information about your particular parish, your particular community. And I do recommend you approach her. She's relatively new, she's about 3 years with the council, but she picked this up very, very quickly. And I do commend that you get in touch with her or just touch base with her if you've got the question. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you're going to wrap this up now, are you?
I've got another speaker now. Sue wants to comment to that first. I've got two speakers now.
Yes, sorry, if I could, thank you, Councillor Miller, and I will obviously pass that positive feedback back to Kieran. Obviously, it really does depend on the question as to whether that should come to me, to Ruth, or to Suzanne Jones, the head of finance. And obviously, Kieran will be help you as much as she can, but I don't necessarily think that she wants to be completely inundated with a whole raft of questions around each ward. What I would really like to suggest is that if we're going to provide some further information as part of the induction packs, if people have follow-up questions, and obviously we'll put contact details in there, appreciating that Kieran is absolutely fantastic with that link to the communities. I'm not sure that she's necessarily the right person directly to have particular conversations directly about just individual ward stuff that might be coming through. At some point, I'm sure you will have a conversation with her, but if I could just ask if you wait for that information to come through as part of the member packs, and we'll give some more direction if that's okay.
Okay. I've got Councillor Tilbury and Councillor Ashfield again like to speak again. No, Councillor Ashfield said that. So just Councillor Tilbury, and to answer Councillor Miller's questions, at the bottom of page 9, there's some recommendations. So I was going to go through that list to finish it off. Okay, Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, just briefly, yeah. I mean, like Councillor Miller, I sort of came to the borough through the parish council. And again, going back years ago, they were forever, they knew far more about Section 106 than you think they would, because it impacts on them. But I think in recent years, the borough has got a lot better, because I seem to recall when I was still on the parish council, they did sort of ask certainly over, and what infrastructure projects do you think we should be including on there, and what should be on there, and ask for a list of that on there. The obvious issue is how they deal with that in the non-parished areas, because there is no parish council, and sadly in a lot of places there is no money coming forward because they're already so developed, very little actually happens there. But I think that's the only way then it can come to is the ward councillors. But this has always been, there's always been this rather odd mishmash, and it is just one of the issues when you have parish and non-parished areas, I think. But it certainly has improved, because we certainly went to a planning appeal once where the inspector just ripped the Section 106 agreement up, because even though the developer had already agreed it, he took £300,000 worth out, because when they tried to justify it, the borough put in things that even the parish couldn't justify, because they hadn't bothered to ask us whether they needed them, and it was just farcical, and I think we're getting a lot better at this now, but it has taken a long time. But I think it comes back to this: how do you deal with the town areas basically, which are really the only unparished ones there? They've always been treated completely differently, and something needs to be done much better there, I think. Thank you, Chair.
Ruth, I don't know if there's anything to answer there.
Just to assure anyone listening to this meeting that there are actually planning legal tests which we use when we're actually assessing and imposing 106 obligations, and that those SIL tests actually ensure that we don't basically receive money that's over and beyond what's necessary to mitigate the harm of the development, which is the basic tenement behind what we do. So yes, no, we don't impose requirements which are beyond what's needed.
Okay. Councillor Ashford, you've got a hand up sort of to the side. Is that you want to speak, or okay? That's everyone who wanted to speak. At the bottom of page 9, there's some recommendations. The first one is that Scrutiny note the work of the 106 Task and Finish group and the contents of the report. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone involved, because it's a really useful, helpful report, and that needs to go back to any officers that have worked on this. So that's noted by the committee, I take it. Scrutiny note the reasoning. Next, to Scrutiny note the statutory reasoning for infrastructure funding statement and its role for monitoring. So I'll take it the committee note that. The reports to be considered at the Capital Programme Board as part of the capital strategy update. Not quite sure what's meant by that, but if Sue wants to answer.
That's absolutely fine. There's an ongoing discussion that happens around Section 106 and so on. There's obviously other conversations going on at other committees as well. All of that information will feed back through and help to update the capital strategy going forward.
So is everyone happy with that? Okay, so I'll move on to next business.
Excuse me, Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
If I might just minute of the committee's time, I'd just like to formally thank all the officers that have been involved in putting this report together. Yes, I heard your thanks just a minute ago, but without them, we couldn't really have this report, which I'm very pleased and proud to be able to present to the Scrutiny Committee. We've got it on the books, and I think it'll go a long way for a better understanding and working relationship between the development side, getting money for our communities, but that's the bottom line, is making our communities better and making sure that we mitigate a lot of the effects of these developments that are going around. So thank you very much, everybody involved.
I think the whole committee will agree with your words there, so definitely make sure the officers that are involved are aware. Okay, next we've got key indicator performance management report, and Nadine McKenzie is the contact officer. I don't know if you want to present anything to do with it, or Sue wanted to say something first. Sue.
Yeah, so Nadine will obviously introduce and take you through the report. In normal circumstances, obviously we would have held a performance panel, and Councillor Ashfield would normally present the performance indicators or the findings or discussion at that panel. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to call a panel, so obviously we brought the entire report to Scrutiny Committee, because obviously we like to at least try and give you a half yearly and an annual list of indicators. What I think is important to know is that we had started a dialogue with performance panel members about how meaningful the indicators that we have are. It was quite a substantial document, and I think we had a very candid and useful conversation around just how effective those performance indicators were. What does it actually tell us? How does it help us know how we're performing? So we have taken the opportunity as part of developing the priority plans that were approved by Council a few weeks ago to look at what are the indicators that we should probably be looking at in terms of, are we achieving our council priorities? That then will distill down into a number of indicators that sit within service and directorate plans. And the intention would be to bring to performance panel the ones that support the actual priority plan. So it's like a building picture, if you like, in terms of this is the service level, how does that feed into the directorate level, and then how does that show that how we're performing against the indicators in the priority plans. The other thing that we've been looking at is how we can be more effective at collecting this information. We recently introduced a new system that's linked into the Programme Management Office, a system called Verto, which allows us to actually record and more regularly update the performance information, and will also allow us, for example, to look at direction of travel. We can start to hold trend information, but more importantly, it will provide a dashboard of information. And then if members want more specific details about a particular indicator, we can provide it. It is quite difficult in the previous reports to actually, I'm going to say it, wade through it and find the actual information that you perhaps want. But also it's that link between, well, yes, there's an indicator, that's the result, but what does it actually mean? And we always use the recycling as an example, because every time we look at it, we have to work out whether, or I can't say that everybody's in this position, is an increase better or worse? Because some of our indicators, actually an increase in the recycling percentage is a bad thing. And some of them, actually, it's a good thing, because it depends on whether it's the level of the amount of waste we have, etc. So we just need to make sure we've got some clarity around that. So what we've done for the Q2 monitoring is a dashboard style report with some highlighted information that is obviously based on the current indicators that we had already got in place. As we go into 21-22, we will look to move that over to the indicators that are now part of the priority plans and start to develop that on a more regular basis. Alongside that, we will also be taking as part of that report the highlight reports for all the major projects. So it's not just the indicators, there will also be the major project update as well, which is something that the performance panel have and others, to be fair, have raised on a regular basis about in terms of having more information about how each of the major projects are performing. So that was all I was going to say as a way by introduction. Obviously, Nadine can take you through the report, but then obviously we're happy to answer any questions or thoughts that people have.
Nadine would like to go through the report.
Yes, good evening and thank you, Chair. So based on the revised approach as outlined by Sue, there were 36 quarterly PIs that were reportable at the end of Q2. 19 ended as green status, 5 were at amber and 7 were at red status. The remaining 5 were unable to report as a result of the COVID pandemic as they relate to community activity. Lockdown restrictions meant that many of these venues were unable to operate, and some, like community centres, were utilised as community hubs. Household waste collections were also affected by the pandemic. Garden waste collection levels were impacted during Q1 as a result of the service being temporarily suspended, whereas glass collection levels were reported as above previous levels. However, by the end of Q2, levels had returned to normal, although still above average. The kilograms of waste per household is reported as an area to watch, with levels being slightly higher than target, primarily as a response directly brought about by people working from and educating children from home, therefore having an increased waste level whilst at home.
Performance regarding planning applications determined is reported as an area to watch also. Pandemic restrictions impacted on site visits in particular, and protocols have now been put in place to allow those site visits to resume and normal activities to commence. The pandemic also impacted on collection rates, in particular around sundry debts and council tax. In direct response, the instalment dates for council tax were amended to run June to March instead of April through to January, as would normally be in a financial year. In addition, timetabled recovery activities were unable to proceed as it would have done in previous years, including the inability to use enforcement agents. Recovery action did recommence in Q2, however, it's still anticipated that collection rates will continue to be affected for the remainder of the financial year. I'm happy to take any questions you may have regarding the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions, members? Okay, thank you very much, Nadine, for your input. Oh no, Councillor Taylor's just indicated.
Thank you very much, Chair. Actually, it's more of an observation about the report, the structure and the layout that I'd like to make, and I'd like to just say that I think this is a really helpful way of producing information, to have a summary of the various RAG statuses, and importantly to have at the very back a table of all of the items that we're actually looking at, because quite often when they're referred to in sort of a shorthand version in the summary, you know, often it requires a councillor to go off and find the original baseline document somewhere else, and so having them actually appended so you can quickly flick through and actually make the data and information meaningful is a really helpful layout. So I just wanted to say that, and also at some point in the future, I know this will probably be a little bit controversial, but it would be really nice if dashboard data was freely available, that you could just go and, you know, quickly look at the dashboard and see how we're getting on with this project or this performance criteria, that it isn't just totally always fed through a performance panel, so that if you want to find out, you know, how is, you know, the Basing View project going ahead or something like this, that you know, we can actually just look at it rather than have to sort of wade through another committee's report. So I think that, you know, performance is something councillors are really interested in, and if it could be accessible, I think that'd be really good. I understand you're going to have to develop that, but
So you'd like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's you know, it's a great observation in terms of the layout of the paper, and certainly we will continue to improve that. I think when we are obviously confident in terms of the information that we're providing, and because a lot of the information is actually, particularly around the projects, is obviously updated monthly, we can certainly look at whether there's somewhere that we can actually provide those updates on a more regular basis. I'm certainly happy to take that question away and have a look at it.
Is there anybody else with questions or anything further, Councillor Taylor? Okay, Councillor George indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I'm uncertain as whether I should raise it here, but we've in my ward we've had some rather intractable and long-term waste collection problems, which don't seem to be going anywhere, frankly. They're persistent, and they seem to be more to do with disagreements between the council and the waste contractor about how things should be done and move forward. And I have that, you know, very much in writing. It is a very difficult problem, actually, because basically the members of the community are caught between the borough council and the waste contractor, I can see, and are just not getting the level of support, and it's going on for months and months and months. We've had some of our members of our community having to send upwards of 34 emails and what have you to get resolution. Now, I don't know where the problem lies precisely, but it does seem to be not the members of the community's problem, but somewhere in the system. But fundamentally, we're ending up now with quite a number of members of the community getting caught up in this, and I was just hoping just to raise that to see if we can try and come to the bottom of that, frankly.
Sue would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. So two things really. Councillor George, I will certainly take that away and follow up with the relevant officers to see if we can find out what's actually going on there. And I think the other longer term enhancement to the way in which we provide performance information is that obviously we are developing the customer services management tools. And over a period of time, once that's up and running, obviously from a customer point of view, it'll have 360-degree feedback. So, and it will link automatically into systems, a lot less human interaction, if you like, in terms of making sure it gets to the right service in terms of resolving issues, but it will also keep updates so that rather than customers having to constantly chase, they can see the progress that's being made on their particular issues. But certainly as part of our longer term performance monitoring, we will certainly start to include the dashboard information around customer contact, customer complaints, how quickly they're resolved. There's a whole raft of new indicators that will be linking specifically into customer service itself. But that obviously is a longer term piece of work that we're just starting now in terms of developing that. But I will certainly follow up your specific point.
Well, thank you very much, and that's very, very encouraging. Thank you, that extension to the monitoring process. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Sue's answered all the points there. So, Councillor McCormack, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question on the table on page 55, becoming a zero carbon council by 2025. You've got 3 rows. The middle row says reduction % in council energy expenditure, council offices, year-on-year reduction, a figure of minus 31.91%. Am I right to infer that even though civic offices have been largely free of staff in the past year, we've actually seen a 31.91% increase in council energy expenditure? Because if that's the case, that's an absolutely shocking statistic. And then the third line below, there's a reduction in energy expenditure of 12.13%. Is that a genuine reduction of 12% year on year? And if we're going to aim for net zero by 2025, should that not be a bigger reduction?
Sue, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I'm going to double check for you, Councillor McCormack, that someone hasn't actually put the, shouldn't have actually put the minus in. We've had a massive reduction in our energy consumption, clearly. So I think that's been in error, because obviously the officers put this directly into Verto. So thank you for spotting that. We'll make sure that's corrected. In terms of the energy expenditure of other council-owned property, that's obviously all the other buildings. That's not the campus. So we would expect to see a reduction, but we have less control over that activity. But we'll certainly follow that up for you in terms of what the comparator is and what that relates to.
I think Sue's answered that, so I don't think the RD needs to come in. Okay. I've got no other implications. So is everyone happy to note the report? Thank you very much for coming this afternoon, this evening, RD.
Thank you.
The last paper we've got to deal with tonight is the Future Works programme. The last one that's on there was the 106, which obviously we've dealt with tonight. I was proposed to leave it empty until the new committee starts up in after the election. I don't know if there's any comment from anybody. Leave it to the new committee. Is that okay, Sadie?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. So if everyone's agreed with that, I call the meeting closed.